Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down having real conversations with real Texans about what's going on in our state. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by my colleague, Hannah Bruck, the policy scholar for our Family Success Project here at TPPF. Today, we're going to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly of all things going on in families across Texas. In particular, why in the past 30 years, only 45% of Texans are getting married. Hannah, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Mandy.
Okay, so you have been doing some really important research here in preparation for supporting families. We know that families are the backbone of Western civilization. They're the backbone of our society, our state, and unfortunately, too many people are choosing not to make a family. So let's hear about the research that you're working on and what Texans need to know and understand so that we can continue to build strong families, which builds happy, thriving children.
Absolutely. I think that there are a lot of moving pieces to this problem. And the part that I want to start with is kind of on an educational level. Mm-hmm. Many young people do not really know what it means to be a part of a family or to get married or to think about having kids. And so we have this deficit where if these individuals are growing up looking at the kind of media that's been released in like the past, even 30, 40 years, what they see are kind of these images of families on television that aren't really accurate representations of what's happening on the ground. And even further than that, many do not have models with their own parents on what it looks like to have a healthy family, a wholesome family, or a mother that can act as kind of a guide into what it's like to be a woman from a daughter's perspective, or for sons in families, maybe they don't have a father figure that can lead them in kind of to thinking about what it means to be a man in the family. And so there's this huge education problem. And a lot of people think of marriage as a sacrifice. So it's very daunting to think about getting married because you have to give up these individual parts of yourself to join this whole, which is inaccurate for a couple of reasons, but that's the large sentiment. And then the second part of this, kind of paired with that makes marriage very intimidating for men and women, is the financial aspect. 46% of respondents in a poll that we did of Texans said that they delay marriage because of financial pressures, because they believe that it would be too costly. And a lot of that is related to housing. And so I think that there's this amalgamation of cultural belief that translates into miseducation that then translates into this daunting specter of what marriage and family really is and all that it entails, which then culminates in kind of economic pressure.
That you broke it down beautifully, and I think that is really important. I look back at really the devastation of our entire education system, but the cultural revolution that we find ourselves in. And I would say that a lot of it started back in the 60s with the rise of the feminist movement and this idea that was perpetuated by Marxists that women are somehow subjugated or relegated to a life of servitude when they become mothers. And I would argue that they could not have gotten it more wrong. I think it was a whole bunch of Marxist men that were looking for easy sex, and they basically engaged in a lot of propaganda to convince women that the most fulfilling part of their life would not be being a wife and a mother. And as someone that has a career, but also has 3 children and an incredible husband, they could not be further from the truth. The most fulfilling thing in my life is being a mother and a wife to my husband, and together we have been able to build this life. But I don't think that message breaks through when we're talking about education, lives, home lives of people. We can see that divorce rates continue to go up and just the lack of marriage. And doesn't that tie to children's success? Isn't there a lot of data that says that one of the easiest predictors of crime and poverty and a whole host of negative externalities is associated specifically with single parenthood, being raised in a single parent family without having that mother and father, both sexes there to help guide, as we always say that, man and woman, husband and wife, mother and father. So what does the data tell us on what kids are experiencing that when they are being raised in single parent, particularly female-dominated households.
Yeah. So the data, and a lot of this is taken from our partners with the Institute for Family Studies and their scholars there. But the data shows that for children, they are 7 percentage points more likely to be on track at age 15 if their parents are married, if they come from a married family. And they also are 7% more likely to earn more than their counterparts from a home that does not have 2 parents. And so it's related to not only kind of the educational outcomes early on, but also later in life when they start getting into careers. It feeds into their stability and their capacity to be earners. And that's not to say that children from single mother homes or single parent homes can't be successful. It's just to say that there truly is kind of this this deficit that cannot be filled of having a second parent being able to bring them up. And actually, a lot of this also relates directly to kind of a child's intake of what relationship looks like and how that feeds into their future for success. So something that's a big priority of us at the Family Success Project and that we've been thinking about a lot is the success sequence, which is an educational initiative in schools of instruction that you are more likely to be successful if you do 3 things in sequence: graduate high school, get a job, get married before having kids. And if that happens, you are more likely to exit poverty. You are less likely to suffer from poverty in your lifetime. You are materially happier. You are wealthier. And there's this kind of range of personal success that comes out of that as well.
Yeah. Doesn't that come from the origins of that study came from the left-leaning Brookings Institute, right? A progressive entity that did this over a decade ago that was saying it really is... It's not that hard when you just look at it in these 3 steps: graduate high school, get a job, and don't have children before you get married. And yet we continue to see, particularly in some of our minority demographics, where in the Black community, we see over 70% of children that are being born out of wedlock. And it's had incredibly detrimental effects to that community to not have that family unit there. So let's go back to kind of where it all starts: dating. I think that's something I've heard this from a lot of my friends and those in my age group, particularly those that have high schoolers and above. I know that I had several friends that were saying that kids didn't want to get driver's license. They didn't want to go out on dates. They were, just kind of on social media and communicating in that way, and really missing what sounds like some very important milestones in the development of how you would interact, boy and girl, that could then become man and woman, husband and wife. So let's hear about what's going on in the dating world that could be impacting this.
It's funny because as someone who's kind of in the dating world and has a lot of friends in the dating world, it's interesting to hear kind of all of these sentiments that I read about in research papers. And then I'm talking to my friends and they say something and I'm like, oh, right there. That's exactly what we're researching and thinking about. And I think that it's kind of 2 parts. You're right. There's this public square that's been moved online. So now people don't have to leave their homes to meet others. And I was talking to somebody about the commodification of kind of dating in general, but really just relationships and how easy that is when it's just freely accessible to you via an app. And I think a big part of it is how much easier it is for people to believe that they can wait or pause on dating because the perfect person is just another swipe away. And so I think apps and that kind of online form have a lot to do with it. But it's not just kind of the apps question. Our colleagues at the Institute for Family Studies, they recently put out some research that said that young people, college-aged, teenage people are just less interested in dating overall. They're just less interested in that kind of relationship. And I think that comes from this, again, broader cultural sentiment of needing to check these personal boxes before working on building community and relationship with others.
Yeah. I got to ask, because I have certainly heard this and suspect that it's a problem. Pornography has become a massive moneymaker, and I would say really staying on the technology advancements that we've experienced in the past century for sure. I'm hearing that I read a study talking about the increase in things like Viagra and whatnot for young people. How do you think that affects the development and the expectations for young people, both for young men that have completely distorted views of women and expectations and femininity, and also for women that are either being coerced and pressured, and or there is a specific standard of women that are digitally enhanced and other things online as to what being a woman and a partner would be. Is that something that you all have looked at?
We've thought about it. This isn't so much falling under really the scope of our campaign, but insofar as it relates to people's sentiments on marriage when we're talking about and thinking about these issues, I think that this is huge as a cultural problem. And I think a lot of the ways that we think about it are somewhat confined typically because we tend to think of it as kind of this male-centric problem. And of course it affects women too, but mostly the pornography that we think of are videos online.
Right.
That's the format that we think of. And that's what men struggle with, and that's what affects women and their perception of the kind of person that they need to be, or the kind of experience that they need to have sexually to be able to meet someone that's going to want to date them. But I think that there also is another part of it that is newer. And I'm kind of afraid to even talk about this because it's this kind of genre of pornography that has taken the form of literature for women to read. It's these smut books that are
50 Shades of Grey.
Right. Or even like it's not even that provocative now. Now it's just kind of like if you're reading a romance novel, it's assumed that there's some pornographic material in it, some kind of smut involved. And what's shocking to me is I know so many girls that will read this and then, you know, see it as a participation in kind of a educational activity. They're like, I'm reading. That's good for me. But I think it's kind of the difference in men and women. Men tend to be more visual. Women tend to love to like build a fantasy. And so what's happening for men when they watch these videos and they build these perceptions of women is equally true for when women read these books and build this perception of a 6'5" billionaire man that is obsessed with her and, you know, takes her away from a difficult life or handles all of these things for her. And it has the opportunity to get equally as perverse and kind of fall down a rabbit hole just as much as there is that opportunity for men watching pornography. And it rewires our brains as young people to think about when we're going out and meeting people, are they matching this standard of this artificial man or woman that we've curated?
I think that's so important when we're talking about technology and the artificial aspect of what is created for men and for women, but also the addictive aspect of it is that constant. And we talk about this a lot in the education space with the growth in ed tech and the growth in these profiteers, these vendors that have figured out not just how to sell to our school systems Chromebooks and tablets for literally kindergartners, which is just absolutely just disgusting in my opinion, but it's the addictive nature of so much of the content. And so when you compound what's happening in schools and the rise in using technology for almost everything at this point, and then you combine that with what's happening socially, the constant interaction and stimulation and these apps, even if you just go back to the OG Facebook and whatever, they're meant to be addictive. They're meant, you know, every heart is a dopamine drip, everything. And so, as you said, it rewires brains where that if you find a partner, if you find someone that you may have the value alignment and may see yourself in the future, relationships aren't a constant dopamine drip. They're effort. They're amazing. Don't get me wrong. But every day in a relationship is not a smut novel. It's not the highs that you feel with the dopamine. It's hard, and you're building together, and to build and to grow something takes a lot of hard work. It's not a fantasy. And I think that, I mean, this is just me looking at it from the outside in, that distortion and expectation on the day-to-day, it must have some impact on the ability to maintain longevity in any relationship, which of course would then lead to marriage and a commitment of family creation.
And it's attractive because it bypasses kind of the importance of humility in the individual.
Yeah.
And I was talking with someone about this the other week, and they were asking me, they said, well, what would you say to somebody that, maybe has their stuff together and they're looking at the dating pool and they're like, there's just no one out there that's right for me. And something that irked me a little bit about the nature of that question was that it like pre-assumes that there is someone out there that has their stuff together, because dating and really marriage and family is kind of that acceptance of, okay, I'm not all the way there and neither are you, so let's come together and try to build something that is the best of both of us. And be aware that there is going to be moments of failure. That doesn't happen outside of like the third act breakups in books, which is immediately kind of overshadowed by the immense love and wealth and all of these other qualities that you just won't find in an average relationship because there's a normalcy to it, because there is this kind of quiet necessary for love to blossom and to turn into that commitment required for family.
Right. And when we talk about this, when we think about the impact on society and what this does to our culture and to our civilization, I said this at the beginning, family was truly the backbone of Western civilization, right? And there's kind of this order of loves that's from Thomas Aquinas, and he says your family, and then your extended family, and then your community. But if you never have the family to begin with, you're missing the nucleus of the entire cellular structure that is what builds society, what builds that natural innate love, which in the parent empowerment movement, I mean, it's mama bears that have driven this, and it's our individual love for our child. We want to see every child succeed, but I want to make sure that every single parent has the opportunity to do what's best for their children. And it is different, but if we don't ever give families the opportunity, if we don't ever explain to them and really create a society with laws that support the family structure, we're going to, I fear that we're going to continue to fall into this materialist, nihilist mindset where government kind of becomes daddy. And we're seeing that. And that people think that someone else can save them, when we know, as someone in a family, that the first person that I look to is my husband. And that's what I think, particularly for women, they need to know that we need strong men. We have to raise strong men, because ultimately they are made. They were designed to be the protector and the provider. But now with that feminist movement of girl boss and girl power and I can do it all myself, it's really distorted the views of far too many young people. And I'm witnessing in my age group a lot of women that this is what was essentially I don't know if indoctrinated is the word, but essentially we were indoctrinated with you can do it all type mindset, and you can be the girl boss and the this and the that. Girl, you cannot. You cannot do that. You cannot. There are not enough hours in a day. There's not enough emotional strength. There's nothing. If you want all the things, and again, I'm not saying that there are not lots of wonderful women and men out there that have not found a partner, but the ones that I know, the ones that I've spoken to, they're always still looking for it. They're still looking for that other half of themselves that they may have missed it in their late 20s and 30s, but they're still looking for that connection and to build and grow with it. Which brings us to the policy side of things. So let's talk about that. I mean, anything that you subsidize, you get more of. I think we have subsidized single parenthood in our society under the intentions of helping and doing what's best for children. And no one wants to see a child suffer. No one wants to see someone suffer, but the road to hell is paved with the best of intentions. So let's talk about what policy has done to influence the actions of families and what that outcome is and what you are pushing for, what we'll be advocating for in the 90th legislative session to make families stronger and to make it something that Texans, particularly young Texans, realize getting married is great. It's the best decision outside of giving my, life to Christ. Getting married was the second best. So what do we need to do?
Yeah. And It's hard because there's always this natural tension in our work of things that the government should not touch and mandate and things that the government can. And so really when we think about what the role of government is in mitigating the family, it's removing barriers. And the first way that we've identified that to be important is in kind of the welfare process. And I think you denoted this in kind of the way in which for many young families, singleness is encouraged, where there's a certain benefit cliff or a marriage penalty that occurs on access to funds that people in low income situations will not have if they get married. And so
explain that a little bit more, because I know what you're talking about, but just explain what you're talking about when you talk about the benefits cliff. We're talking about the medical services, the housing services, the food services, things like that. So explain that a little bit of why and how that is penalized.
So if it's a individual filing for these services, the way in which a benefit cliff can occur or that marriage could be penalized is if they choose to join households or get legally married with another person, or to say that there are in any kind of partnership with this person, that they lose access to a certain amount of benefits. So it's a massive reduction in the amount of money given to them or the amount of benefit given to them in a medical context, in a food stamps context, in like SNAP EBT context, and many people do not want to reduce access to these programs, which in some cases, even in housing, they will have like a lack of housing. They'll no longer be eligible for certain kinds of housing where they may have been raising their children if they get married, because it's a signal to the state that, rightly so, it's kind of a step towards responsibility. But the problem is it incentivizes people from taking that step towards encourage responsibility by then making there be a consequence to a decision getting married. And so when we think about it in our work, the best way that we think the government can help is to just kind of remove its meddling in the sense of penalizing people for making decisions that will benefit not only them, but the community around them. And the other side of that is utilizing funds that exist to lift these families up and to strengthen Texas families. A lot of what we think about and that we're working on right now is the program Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, which is a block grant that we get as a state from the federal government every year. It's millions of dollars. And we have now a slush fund of hundreds of millions of dollars. I think that the most recent report said that we have saved somewhere $300 million. And there are four purposes to TANF, but the important ones are, and they're split between four agencies, are to help strengthen families. And a lot of the initiatives that could be funded using these funds are not funded just because there's not clear direction internally in the departments. And so we see that as a huge opportunity to actually take an initiative to lift these families out of poverty in a way that is constructive to them and doesn't trap them in a system where if they try to take steps towards responsibility or partnership, which doubles their resources, which doubles their emotional capacity, their availability for time, their availability to pour into their kids, they're penalized. And so those are kind of the two parts of our thoughts on the welfare system.
Well, so it's interesting. My master's degree is in urban planning, and this is what I wrote about, in particular in the urban areas, and focused on specifically Cabrini Green in Chicago, which was the first project. And that's where the name projects came from, right? As which was that the government stepped in trying to, in theory, help a small percentage of unwed mothers that didn't have a partner, a husband, a father to help raise their kids. And they put in plans which essentially became a partnership and marriage penalty, which was to access these facilities, these housing facilities, you couldn't be married. And it contributed to going in the Black community specifically from being in the 20 percentile of unwed mothers up to, again, somewhere between between 70 and 80%. And that was just one of the policies that was put in place, where men originally thought, well, we just won't get married so that we'll have housing. But then they, realized, well, I can have multiple children with multiple women and they will ultimately be provided for. And it really did put in some perverse incentives that I think people need to recognize. And we need to talk about the incentive structure that is put in place when we are trying to provide that social safety net without providing a hammock for people to stay in.
Right. And it was tragic. We were talking with some of our partners from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and they were telling us that they have spoken to and met families that have 4, 5, 6 generations of having lived in government subsidized housing. Yeah. And for many of these individuals, it's hard to see a way out of that situation because there's a limited model, right? Because there's not some kind of actual legitimate empowerment that would lift them out of poverty.
That's right. That's it, is when that becomes all that you know. And we saw this, recently as the federal government proceeded to go after a lot of these food benefits. It became trendy to post, for those on government assistance, to post their huge food hauls. And rightfully so, Americans' heads exploded. They were mad. Those that are not receiving the benefits or those that are not exploiting the system were incredibly frustrated at seeing all of this. And of course, that's not the majority, but the reality is that one is too many when that you are exploiting, quite frankly, the generosity of taxpayers. And then, of course, we see in Minnesota, it's under investigation, the Leering Center and all of the other exploitation. And I think that is where Americans really feel the pressure in their bank accounts, and the frustration at just how large this mentality has become. And it's ultimately because people are not pair bonding and spending their life raising their children because they've been given an alternative option. And I think that is something that people really need to recognize is we can support those that need some support. However, we should not be having 5 and 6 generations of families thinking that this is the way to live your life. Ultimately, it entraps them in really bad circumstances where they can't reach their full God-given potential. And it puts a burden onto families, onto individuals, which is where I wanted to go next. So you mentioned at the beginning that a lot of young people are mentioning that they are choosing not to get married because they have this expectation of how much money, what their financial stability needs to be. And while that is admirable, right, is you obviously want to be able to pay your rent as a young person. And if you decide to have family, be able to afford your children and whatnot. But let's hear a little bit about how that is impacting the decisions that young people are making and family stability.
I think that there are kind of 2 camps, and I feel terrible because I feel like I've answered every question you've given me with. There are 2 parts to this.
No,
but it really is a multifaceted issue. And so the first camp of people, I would say, are the young people that are not interested in cultivating responsibility. And those are the young people that have been kind of told that the best use of their years right now is to party hard, is to make a bunch of money and then blow it over the weekend and go back into the office, is to kind of be free and pursue that side of things first. And then the other camp of people are not necessarily more responsible in a substantive way, but maybe they're thinking about marriage and family. Yeah. And their barrier that they see outside of just, spending their money imprudently, but the barrier that they see is mostly around kind of what it means to be a family. And so many people see this picture of the American family, and it requires a house and 2 cars and 2.5 kids and a good education for the kids and a good sports life and a good social life for their kids and all of these other things that cost a lot of money. Yeah. And it's very daunting to come out of college, and for many people today to have student debt and to be having to navigate a first job on a relatively low salary and to be thinking about paying rent and then to be doing the math in your head of, if I add another person to this equation, how much more is that going to cost me? Yeah. And if I try to add another person and then kids to this equation, how would that even be possible? And so I think that the preeminent concern is kind of this picture of family that young people have constructed in their minds. And I say that it's a picture because I don't think it's necessarily reality. I think that a lot of our expectations as to what the modern family is and should be does not look like what we've had in the past of a 2-story home and 2 cars and a perfect suburban neighborhood. And I think that many young people underestimate the value of coming together and creating partnership, which then allows for the formation of community. And I mean that kind of in 2 senses. First, in like an emotional sense, in a personal sense, marriage allows the kind of responsibility to be bred that will then create better and higher earnings. If you are 2 people that are dedicated to each other and are dedicated to building a life, you are going to find a way to make that work. And you are going to be prudent and responsible because you are no longer just thinking about yourself and kind of being in this camp of partying all the time. It's not to say that couples can't party, but you're at least doing it with another person in mind and your future perspectively in mind. And then the second part of it is also in the financial sense. So not just the emotional side of things, but in the financial sense, you are going to be better prepared to have children because, again, as you get further along into your marriage, you are going to be thinking about the ways in which you need to step up to afford your kids, and you're going to make that happen. And I think a lot of people see marriage as this like specter that impedes their ability to be individuals, and then also is just kind of out of reach because they have this picture. But if they invest also in smaller homes, starter homes, and are really intentional about kind of their expectations, maybe you don't have 2 cars, maybe you just have 1, or maybe, you're picking up another job because you really want to invest in the community that you've created. That's kind of a natural part of, I think, building a family. So all of that kind of comes together, I think, for young people and their sentiments on marriage. And I hate to go on kind of a tangent, but I think this also relates to how we raise young men and young women. And I was talking with a sociologist at a university in San Antonio recently, and he was talking to me about the young men that he sees in his classes. And it was heartbreaking because he said that young men have kind of lost what it means to be a hero. They don't have models for heroes. Right. And so their attention isn't so much for the vast majority of them on heroes, like in The Lord of the Rings, that have this kind of honor and responsibility that persists. A lot of them are kind of caught in this male-dominated online space where there's either this hyper-feminization or there's this like hyper-masculinization, which becomes very toxic and anti-woman. And he said something that I haven't been able to stop thinking about, and it was that young women or young men also think that to ask a woman to get married and to have a family with them is to harm her, is to impede her individuality and success. How terrible is that for young men? They're not even allowed to prospect what it might be like to be a hero. And it's so important that they have those models.
Well, yes. So I think it was C.S. Lewis that said, since children are likely to encounter cruel enemies, at least let them have heard of brave knights with courage. But that takes me to, so in this way, I talk a lot about the woke intersectionality movement, which is all born out of Marxism, right? Marxism and the proletariat taking over the bourgeoisie. That was just the original component of it, but the spin-offs of it, so that's the genus and the species of it, as James Lindsay explains, which he explains it very clear. It's all Marxism from the genus, but the species, which feminism is one of the species, right? And then you have race and queer theory and all of this. But there was this whole feminist movement that one of the spinoffs of that, the craziness, was that a woman could never consent to sex. And it was like, what? Like, it was just such that somehow that we are always an oppressed class, where the reality is for young women, I would say you have a power. I mean, we've seen kingdoms taken down by militaries who exploited the love of rulers for a woman. I mean, women have immense power if you don't give it away. And that's something that people don't want to talk about. But to that point, I think that a lot of that is just absurd that men are being told that aspect. But women are also, again, that feminist movement. We have the feminine power that we have is incredibly strong. And to not understand that and not recognize that our femininity and our desires to be mother and caregiver and the beauty that God gave us as women is really, really destructive, both to women, but also to men who are being hyper feminized and emasculated and over medicated and all of these things. And so I think that that is a great point. In fact, I have 2 daughters. And then when my husband and I went for the third, I was like, dude, you may just make girls. Like, this might be it. But it ended up, we had some of our friends have some property, and they got the list to see the gender of our child, and they shot a big old gun and blew up blue tannerite. And I'm on camera, like our friends were filming it. And I can remember this sense of, I was so excited. But if you look at my face, I'm terrified in the picture or in the video, because the responsibility of raising strong men now that are not this weird groiper weirdo movement of like bad women, but that it also is not, oh, I can't have sex with a woman. I can't pursue a woman because that is somehow harmful to her. I mean, it's all just a bunch of overeducated Marxists, psychopaths who have gone through the schools of social sciences and are constantly looking for papers to publish that are completely counter to common sense and just nature and the laws of nature. Anyways, that's kind of a tangent that I've gone on, because I see all of this of what's going on, and I think, I have 3 little people to raise, and I think for my daughters, who are they going to marry? You can be a strong masculine man and not be an abusive man, and that is really, I would say that's where biblical context comes into play, is that we want to raise good strong men that understand their roles as protectors and providers, and women's roles. That really does bring us the most joy. I mean, I saw a video of a woman the other day, and she was a beautiful woman she was in career clothes. And she basically said, I bought into the girl power, I can do it all career, and I'm successful and da-da-da. And then she just like gets teary-eyed and said, and I don't want to do it anymore. I want to quit. Where's my husband? I want a family. And there's far too many women that are being sold a lie.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is happening. And there's far too many men that are being sold a lie too. It's usually by online sources.
And I recently wrote an op-ed on this trend that was going around online that was like boyfriends are out. Like British Vogue released this article that was like boyfriends are out of Vogue. And I thought it was interesting because in it was like this academic term that was cited and that has been created. It's like heteropessimism. It's the belief that like heterosexual relationships will end in disappointment. But it also kind of got at this idea that for women, the most empowering thing that they can do is be single. And I think that that's a very difficult message, and it's a very isolating message, because for the women that care about relationships and want to have relationships, it feels like a personal failure to say, I actually want to get married. Yeah. And I want to have kids. And then the others in the room are looking at that woman and going, okay, but what about your career and your independence and your empowerment? And these things are not mutually exclusive. You can actually be married and be a empowered, educated, career-driven woman and still have that community. And it's interesting because I recently had Lily Kate Cole on actually Sweet Tea. I was a guest host, and that episode should be out or coming out soon. And she was talking about feminism, the specter of feminism. Yeah. And she told me this story of this woman that she ran into when she was country dancing one time, who was telling her that, when she dies, what she's going to have on her grave is that she was a doctor. And it was very daunting for Lily Kate. And it's kind of concerning for all of us, I think, because Lily Kate pointed out that the important thing to have on tombstones is like relationships to others.
Wife and mother, daughter.
Right, daughter, friend, sister. And I think that it's immensely telling that woman wanted to have doctor on her gravestone. I don't think that's a fault. That's how she relates to her community. That's how she perceives her best interaction with the community to be. But it's very impersonal. And so I think that there's a compassion there that we can all get at in this kind of experience of women being fed this message of to be productive, to be empowered, to be the right kind of woman. You must check these boxes of career. And that will be how you relate best to your community, and shying away from and being isolated from the family.
And that's fine if your choice is to do that. I would say, again, in my season of life, very few women, that's their choice at this point, even if they are in that position. But it's what you might grab onto, because there's nothing more fulfilling and there's nothing that brings me more joy than my children and the hugs and the love and the seeing them succeed and play sports or music or whatever. Like that is the high. That is the dopamine drip that a lot of these people are getting. But to your point on, what is it going to say on your tombstone? That is the nihilist. That is the fatalist, materialist view. So what's the point? What's the point of us being here? And I think that there is a progression in life, and we can look at the past couple hundred years of the incredible boom that technology and we live better than kings and queens did 300 years ago. And so there is a growth, and that was built in to life, that was designed by God, and there's a progression in place. And it is very sad to see that far too many people have adopted this very nihilist view of it's the here and now, and this is all that matters. Whereas my number one, goal in life is raising up healthy, happy children that love the Lord and that their eternal life is there. And so when you don't have that, I often see these people come in and testify at the SBOE or even testify, and they make everything about the collectivist mindset, this Mondami collectivist. Oh, it's for everybody. Look, my kids aren't everybody. My kids are my kids. And that every parent feels that way. And when you strip that away, particularly from women, but it's men too. Men naturally want to be protectors and providers. When you strip that away, you strip something out of their soul that, particularly for women, there is a finite amount of time. There's a clock. And I don't always talk about it. There is a clock ticking. And too many women get to that mid-30s and they go, oh my gosh. And he's not, they've built the billionaire, whatever mindset, 6'5", in their mind. And then they go, well, where is he? And I just want to be like, honey, he doesn't exist. Grow and build with a man, build a life, make $1 billion together. Like even the ones that have it, Elon Musk is a billionaire, and no offense, but like, it's not like he has multiple wives and things like that. And so I think he looks for love too. So I'm just saying, like, that companionship, that love, and that partnership is ultimately what's going to fulfill you. And money will come because you aren't paying 2 light bills and you aren't paying 2, rents and da-da-da. But I think that's so important for people to talk about. And more women like yourself, young people that are in the dating and the searching age for your partner, I hope you guys are talking about it more, that there is no perfect man, and that the fun of life is building it together, and that no party, no, club, no whatever that you're going to do in your career will fulfill you like the joy of your knowing your husband's got your back and you get to raise children. Nothing is as good. And I've gotten to do a lot of cool things in my career. Nothing is as good.
Yeah. And we think a lot about the community, spousal love and friendship.
Yeah.
That then begets the love and community within the family.
That's right.
And so, yeah.
Okay, before we wrap, I want you to look at that camera right there. I want you to talk to the women who are in their 20s and 30s. I want you to talk to the teenagers who are out there that are being fed this BS that their life is better alone and that partying is better, or that there's some 6'5" billionaire out there waiting for them. Talk to them and tell them what their life can look like and what they should really be searching for as they grow and learn and become their best self.
I think it's very daunting, and so I'm like shy about addressing like a whole of this problem. But I think that I would want young people to know that it's immensely important to accept that you will never find the perfect person, but that doesn't mean that you cannot work to build something perfect together. And marriage is that acceptance and humility, and then family is that acceptance and humility of the fact that you will not be surrounded by people that will know everything that you need the minute that you need it and give it to you immediately, but that you have to work to love each other and to cultivate a friendship And then goodness and success and financial stability and material happiness will come out of that. And to listen less to the voices online that tell you that you need to dress a certain way or act a certain way or go to specific places or say these specific lines to find the perfect person. And get out there and meet people, build relationships in your community and friendships. And out of those communities and relationships, it is natural that love and a friendship that then can turn into a marriage and a family will follow.
Hannah, thank you for joining me today to talk about this really important issue. I hope more women realize the importance and that they too will be joining the parent empowerment movement as they fight for their own children in the future. You're doing such incredible work. We are grateful to you. Thank you for joining us today on Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. And now you have the power.